Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about something I'm really excited about. I'm not going to be talking about any books, not a single book. Well, that's not true. I'm going to be talking about one book, but it's a textbook. Sorry, I'm petting my cat. She's rubbing my legs. Yeah, I'm going to be talking about a textbook, but no novels, I guess is a better way of putting it. Today, we're going to be talking about analyzing your reading preferences. So that way you know how to identify more easily books you want to read. So when I was in school, I took a class on reader's advisory, and basically reader's advisory is book recommendations. It's a library term for book recommendations. And our textbook was Reader's Advisory in the Public Library by Joyce Saricks. I should have had that memorized. I had a really old edition. This is what they had at the bookstore for me to buy. I mean, I literally got this from my school bookstore, but it was like 4 editions older than the one that we wanted. It's fine. So we learned that there's a way of breaking down books to their mechanics that you can kind of use to analyze specifics about a book beyond just the genre or the storyline to see if it's something that people want to read. So when somebody comes up and says, I need a book to read, and you ask, like, what kind of books do you like? And they respond with, oh, I like this author, or, oh, I like fantasy or whatever. Well, okay, so think about your favorite genre. Do you like every book in that genre? Have you never read a book in that genre that you didn't enjoy or wasn't as good as some others? No. And so there's more to a book than just its genre. And even with a favorite author, like, what about that author did you like? Did you like the fact that they worked in some humor? Did you like the fact that, there's so many things. So there are what we call elements of appeal, and there's like 4 major categories, and you kind of want to figure out what sort of thing in each category really appeals to you, and that will help you identify that in other books from the future. And these are the things that, here she is, these are the things that I'm always talking about when I'm giving the breakdown in my videos. So the elements of appeal are a way to break down the feel of a book, to kind of get down to the nitty-gritty of what specifically, beyond just the storyline, you liked about the book. And so this goes beyond genre. These are applicable to any fiction book. It doesn't have anything to do with story or genre or anything. So the first element is pacing. Now, pacing refers to how densely written the book is and how quick of a read it is and how quickly the story progresses, basically. So a very easy way, without ever having to read a book, to determine its pacing is if you flip through and, a chapter end. That's fantastic. See how there's not a lot of paragraph breaks? That means that there's not a lot of dialogue. There's not a lot of white space on the page. So this is going to be more densely written. There's more description. There's more prose in this book. Let me see if I can find a page that's got a lot of dialogue on it. Of course not, because this book is super densely written. Well, it's not a full page. But you can see down here, this is what dialogue looks like. So in a book that's got a faster pacing, why won't you focus? Well, I mean, you can see it. A book that's got a faster pacing and a lot of dialogue, the pages are going to all be like this, where there's lots of white space, there's shorter sentences, and that's a book that's going to move along much faster. I mean, literally because there's less words on each page. So that's one way to, without even reading a book, determine. I mean, obviously, you're not going to know about the story, the pacing of the storyline, but you're going to know how light or heavy a book is purely by looking at how dense the words are on the page. So think about the books that you've read in the past, if you've enjoyed, if they've had more dialogue or more like description and like internal thoughts and that sort of thing, things that are going to completely fill that page, or if it's going to be more dialogue where you've got a lot more white space. So that kind of helps you decide on pacing that you prefer. Now, there's also pacing in the storyline. So is there a lot of action that's happening that helps move the story along? Or is it more of a psychological book where people are like up in their heads? So think about that. Do you prefer things that have a lot more action and things going on? Like thriller books are usually pretty action heavy. Fantasy, not so much. There's often a lot of like plotting and that sort of thing that's going on. Not to say that there isn't action, but they tend to have a lot more world building, which again is going to be that denser prose, and they have a lot of plotting. So just again, kind of decide which one tends to be your preference. Finally, with pacing, a lot of books, the pacing changes throughout the book. And sometimes it'll be faster in the beginning where there's a bunch of action, and then the rest of the book is aftermath, so there's not as much action going on. Or sometimes there's a bunch of world building and character development at the beginning of a book, and then once all of that's established, a lot more action will start to happen towards the end of the book, so the pacing will build. And so is that something you prefer, where there's a varied pace because you like the world building, but you also like the action? Or, there's all kinds of options. And again, I just want everybody to know there's no right answer here. It's just identifying what your preferences are so that you can recognize them in books that you want to read. That way you have more to go on than just, that story sounds interesting when you're looking at a book. Now, so that's pacing. That's the first element of appeal. The next element of appeal is characterization. And I put this up here because, none of this is verbatim, but all of the information I'm giving you is from this book. So if this is something that's super interesting to you, you can get this off the internet for like $10. I don't know that anyone would want to beyond a librarian, but in case you were wondering, this is where I got all of my information, and I will credit her and this book down below. But anyway, so for characterization is how does the author treat their characters? So is character development the whole point of the book? Is this a character-driven book where you're going to follow someone through their whole life? Or is this more of an action book and the characters are just kind of like set dressing? They're both are completely valid. Does the author rely on character tropes? So that's the sort of thing where you get a lot of picture YA, where you have the angsty teenager that nobody understands them and they're just so upset and they're in this all on their own. And that's like the whole point of the book, is them going and forging something by themselves. And not to say that there won't be character development later down the book, but as soon as you start reading that book, you recognize this character. Imagine you're reading a hard-boiled detective novel and you've got the washout cop who's now a private eye and he's, seen some things or whatever. Like, you immediately identify who that character is. You don't need, again, there may be more development later on, but sometimes there's not. Sometimes you just have this like caricature that the author leans on for you to know who these characters are, and no development is really needed beyond that. So Is that something you are fine with because you think character development bogs a book down? Or do you need a bunch of character development to really feel connected to the characters? Both are completely valid, and you will see both in books. So it's important to know which is your preference. And something that you get a lot is multiple points of view. So that's another way that authors handle their characters, is a full assembly cast where each character gets their own point of view. So the story is told from their perspective from times, or one point of view following one character and everyone else kind of orbits around them. I personally really like books that have multiple points of view because I find them more interesting, and they help break up the pacing. They make they break the book up, which speeds up the pacing. I tend to like books that are a little bit faster paced personally. So I really like an assembly and an ensemble cast. An assembly. I like an assembly. I really like an ensemble cast personally, but sometimes it's taken too far and you're like, I can't keep everybody straight. So there's also a balancing act there too. So just whatever your preference is. So that was characterization. The next element of appeal is storyline. So this is not actually what the story is, but how the storyline feels. So this is the general feel of the story. So if you could describe the story, the feel of the story, not the story itself, but the feel of the story with like one word or phrase. So like action oriented or inspirational or tragic or racy or investigative. I was like, what is that word? So that's the storyline. And some things to think about with storyline is, what is the focus of the story? Is the focus more on action, or is it on character development, or is it on addressing some sort of issue like The Hate U Give addresses racism in America? You know, like that is a book about an issue. Not to say that there isn't character development and stuff in it, but that's a book about an issue. So what is the focus of this book? And are you someone who likes to read a book that like makes you think about issues? Are you someone who likes to read a book because you want to identify with really well developed characters? Are you someone who likes to read a book because there's a lush world that you can kind of like fall into? Or, you know, these are the things you need to think about when you're trying to figure out what kind of storyline you like beyond just, oh, I liked this book. Well, why did you like that book? What about the story appealed to you? So the final element is frame and tone. And this describes the atmosphere of the book. So we just talked about the storyline of the book. Now we're talking about the atmosphere of the book. So the frame is the specific setting and of the book, where the story takes place. So for fantasy, often it's in this made-up world. For historical fiction, it's like a specific time and place on Earth. Sci-fi, it might be on this other planet. So that's the specific setting of the book, and the setting will often affect the tone. So the tone is, we talked about how with storyline, if you could describe the story of a book with one word or phrase. Now the tone of the book is if you could describe the feeling of the book, the feeling the book gave you with one word or phrase. So bleak or upbeat or foreboding or humorous, those sorts of things. That is the overall, like, describe how this book made you feel in one word or one phrase. That's what the tone is. So, like, my husband really, really likes heavy, depressing, I would like to say books, but really it's movies. And that's not my thing. So I can almost guarantee if he's like, oh, this movie is so good, it's about World War II. I'm like, nope, not for me. Thanks. Not to say that I don't enjoy history, but I don't enjoy things that are going to bring me down. And so I way more identify with like upbeat and humorous than like bleak and grim and that sort of a thing. So I hope this was helpful for you to kind of think about things that you enjoy in books. That way you can identify them in future books. There are other things there are a handful of other things that I didn't list that might affect how you feel about a book. For example, for me, I didn't realize this until I actually started thinking about the books that I had read, but I almost exclusively read books with a strong female protagonist. Not to say that I don't ever read books that don't have that, but it's pretty rare. And I'd never realized that until I actually started listing books that I had read and thinking about them, and I was like, there is a very definite pattern here. So are you someone who prefers books that have a lot of inclusivity? Are you somebody who prefers like female leads or male leads? But so there are a few elements that don't fit neatly in here, but for the most part, I hate when people are like, hey, I need a book to read. What do you recommend? And that's literally all the direction they give me, because it could be anything. Like, for example, I hate Dan Brown books. Hate them. I love the stories. I think the stories are really interesting. I can't stand his writing style. And I made it through like 4 of his books in a row. And then I finally was like, I just can't do it anymore because the stories are no longer good enough to overcome how terrible I think his writing is. Personally, it like nails on a chalkboard trying to read his book. And so if you were to just have zero information on what somebody likes, and they were to walk up to you and be like, hey, what should I read? And you're like, well, Dan Brown books are really popular. Like, that means literally nothing. This is why I don't do recommendations. I only do reviews, because without knowing how you lean on any of these things, or what kind of genres you like to read, or, you know, if there are specific topics that you want addressed in books or any of that, I have absolutely no idea if you're going to like a book or not. So I can tell you if I enjoyed it and if it was well written, and I can give you this breakdown, but beyond that, it's up to you. So I wanted to kind of give you like the answer key. That way, when I talk about a book and I give the breakdown, you actually know what I'm talking about. And so I hope this was helpful. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more content, make sure to subscribe before you leave. And until next time, happy reading. And I promise I'll talk about a book next time. Hold on. I am actually going to use a book. Someone who that's all I can think of.